Hey, what's up you guys? It's the Curious Owl here, and I have another book review for you guys. So this is going to be on A Tale Dark and Grim by Gidwitz. Now this was a book that my younger sister Tori had recommended to me. She read this I think about a year ago or so, maybe 2 years ago, and really enjoyed it and thought I would enjoy it because I am a big fan of the original Grimm Stories. So the Grimm Stories, for those of you who are not familiar with it, are, take your Disney fairy tales, for example, Cinderella. That actually, the Disney version is not the original version of that story. The story was kind of, in a way, moderated towards a child audience because the original story written by the Grimm brothers was much more bloody, much more gory. There was a lot of things that were completely different. So Walt Disney had to moderate these stories in order to make them much more kid-friendly. But this centers around the story of Hansel and Gretel. So we all know the story of Hansel and Gretel, where there's these two siblings, a brother and a sister. They run away from home, and they try to basically live on their own and come up across a witch's house, which is made of candy. They get trapped there, and the witch tries to eat them, but they decide to shove her into the oven and kill her that way. And they escape and go back home. So that's the original story. That's not really what happens in this book. What Gidwitz does with this book, with the original story, is he takes it and he weaves it with other Grimm stories. So there's several different Grimm stories in this novel that Hansel and Gretel are a part of. Now that's not the original Grimm story, I believe, but I think it's a really creative way for Gidwitz to incorporate all of these Grimm stories into one, because it gives the reader a chance to kind of like get them all in one sitting without having to read several different stories. It's all kind of in one book and makes sense. So there's the story of Faithful Johannes, there's the story of Hansel and Gretel themselves, which is modified because I think that the author, what he did was he altered the stories a smidge so that they would fit with the storyline. So they're not 100% accurate, but I really like what he does with it. Then there's the story of the 7 swallows, or as some people call it, the 7 ravens. Then there is a story about the devil called the 3 golden hairs. That one's about basically this devil, he makes this deal with a king and steals a boy. I don't know. It's really strange. Like half of these Grimm stories, and well, no, not even half. The Grimm stories in this novel I'm not familiar with because I mean, I love the Grimm stories, I love the original stories. I don't know all of them though. And unfortunately, the only one I really know out of this entire book is the Hansel and Gretel one. But it's really interesting because it's not like a lot of other Grimm-based stories you read. Adam does a really interesting thing where he takes two of the most prominent characters in all of the Grimm stories and one of the most popular stories and weaves them with these other kind of more obscure stories in a way that creates its own storyline. And like I said, he alters them to a point where they can all fit and it makes sense. It takes, I think, a lot of hard work to be able to make this as sound as it is. It was a great story. Though, as much as the Grimm stories could be moderated to a young audience, this book is not for kids. This is not a kid book at all. This is not even a middle grade book. This is a YA novel in my mind, and even an adult novel. There is so much blood and gore and violence that is in this book that is incredible. And another thing that I really like with this story is the fact that the narrator of the story, it pretty much sounds like it's just this big monologue, like just someone telling you this entire story. And the narrator does these asides throughout many points of the novel in order to kind of help explain something, help actually pronounce some of the German cities that are in this story, and to let you know that this is a really gory part. Kids should not be reading this part, essentially, which I think is really clever because with, you know, the story of Hansel and Gretel, you would think that it could be a kid's novel. It's not. Not in the slightest. It is so gory, it's so violence-ridden, and I love it. I'm a bit of an action girl, so I'm okay with gore and violence. But yeah, I mean, there's really not much else I wanted to talk about with this. It's a really good story, and I think it's a very interesting take on some of the most interesting Grimm stories that have come about. And I think the idea of taking Hansel and Gretel and making it a much bigger story than it originally was a great idea, because the story of Hansel and Gretel can be told so many different ways, and this was just one way to tell it. And I think that it's incredible that Adam Gidwitz even had the idea to incorporate all of these other Grimm stories and do it so flawlessly. I feel like many people who would even try to attempt this would just fail miserably because they wouldn't be able to find these little points where they could all connect. But that's essentially my review of A Tale Dark and Grim by Adam Gidwitz. I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend this to anyone who is 15 years, 16 years actually, or older, because of the fact that some of this stuff might give young kids nightmares. Not recommended for anyone younger than a teenager, I would say. So the next book that I will be reading is called Sing It to Her Bones by Marcia Talley. I don't really know much about this book. I got this as a kind of one of those blind date books at my bookstore when I was at the mall one day. And the cover basically said, like, if you like books that are kind of about, like, surviving an illness and stuff like that, like, or just a really good heartfelt story, just reading from the book jacket, I'll read you this. She lost her job, she almost lost her life. Now Hannah is taking her first brave steps back into the world, wearing a wig and her heart on her sleeve after a frightening bout with breast cancer. So this is essentially a story about a woman with breast cancer who has pretty much, like, gotten a second chance at life, I think, and I'm interested to see how this is. I'm really scared too because of the fact that many stories that I know that are written like this don't usually have a good ending. So I'm interested to see how this goes. I hope I really like it, and yeah. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this book review. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please do give it a big thumbs up, and if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!